Deliver on the Marta Group strategy. So I actually have I have a bit of a reflection too, which I hope contextually makes sense at the end of it. Who knows who Jim Stockdale is? A number of you. Okay, so if I get this wrong, don't correct me. Okay, don't correct me. So for those who don't know, Jim, you can Google this. But where I came across it was in Jim Collins' book Good to Great, and I'd suggest if you haven't actually already bought Jim Collins' book Good to Great, don't. Okay. The reason is it's quite old now. It's a really kind of seminal work in business literature, etc. But in fact, there's two examples of really extraordinary performance in business. He used both Enron and Fannie Mae and Fannie Mac. Not over the long term seem to have done quite as well as Jim might have advertised back in the 90s and early 2000s. There's still some good stuff in the book. But one of the things he reflects on is this Jim Stockdale, who happened to be a prisoner of war in North Vietnam and the Hanoi Hilton. He was there for 8 years. He was the most senior US prisoner of war. And he was there for 8 years and tortured more than 20 occasions and did quite a bit of extraordinary work in supporting morale of his fellow troops within the prison over that time. He came out and got a Congressional Medal of Honour, etc., for his extraordinary work and support. But long story short, Jim Collins, one of the good things in his book, he actually went and interviewed Stockdale and was just intrigued as to how he had survived this, particularly with his morale intact. And of course, the bottom line is Stockdale said, well, you know, I never lost faith that in the end good would prevail and I would get out of there. And he asked Stockdale, so there's obviously a lot of your colleagues who didn't get there. You know, why did you survive and why didn't others? Why didn't the others survive? And he says it's easy, the optimists didn't make it. That's not quite as depressing as it's hanging for the end of the story. But he goes on to say that, in a nutshell, what happened was the optimists were a little bit unrealistic. They'd say, you know, I'll be out by Christmas, and Christmas would come and go, and then they'd say, well, I'll be out by Easter, and Easter would come and go, and then Thanksgiving would come and go. And he literally said, well, in fact, they ended up literally dying of a broken heart. And Stockdale went on and articulated this. He said, one must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you must never lose, that faith, to the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. There is another book by a social scientist out of Canada who I met with when I was there. It was a very interesting woman, an academic, who wrote a book called Getting to Maybe, and it was around sort of some social constructs and impact of interventions using complexity theory. She also reflected on this Stockdale paradox, and to do her justice, she said simply it's the complex between absolute dedication to the great vision and ruthless commitment to staring reality in the face. And sometimes I think we're there. And what we're going to talk about now is reinvesting and re-exploring what was a great presentation by Ian Hyde of the new Marta strategy late last year. But to say, so what's the next steps and how do we do it while keeping the lights on and staying alive for the greater good? So where do we go? This is a bit of a reminder of where, again, August, September? Can't remember which month. You were introduced to the new Marta strategy. A lot of very thoughtful and good work. Sorry I wasn't around for this, that went into this. And again, I don't have to sort of read off the mission to you, but this is clearly the purpose, the reason and the base of what and why we bother. And obviously what we're trying to tease out here is a holistic approach to healthcare in response to changing community needs. That's the driver. And the Sisters of Mercy since 1906 have been teasing out that community need and that unmet need, and that's got to be our purpose and our differentiator going forward. And again, what teased out of this, and I'm not suggesting that there wasn't some attention and living into this reality, but a very clear articulation of a vision then. That wasn't just about a sickness model and people coming to four walls and getting care to get better from their illness, but a much more healthy and rounded focus built off that background and tradition about empowering people to live better lives through improved health and well-being. Opens up all sorts of possibilities. And again, I think in a very thoughtful way, went to some trouble, and this is stuff you've seen before, so I'm not going to read all this out, but just to remind you that there was some very, very deliberate attempt to articulate how we would know and what we needed to pay attention to deliver against that strategic vision. And it was about internal alignment, about collaboration and shared purpose amongst our community. Partnerships for greater contact. We don't have to do absolutely everything, and in fact it's becoming increasingly challenging in this complex world and the context of healthcare that we work in to do that. Outstanding relevant service. We actually have to build off what has been 113 years of commitment to excellence, and without that platform nothing becomes possible. Influence through scale, and this isn't about being big or growing for the sake of growing, but how do we stay relevant and how do we influence and how we make an impact greater than we are today. And again, finally, it's about investing in the future and having financial stability and sustainability, and we'll get back to that obviously. This was an interesting thing, because naively over the last 18 years while I've been away, I thought you were always just one group. But interestingly, you were brought back together as a group, and the whole issue in that deliberate event back in 2016, bringing health, research, education together, underpinned and supported by philanthropy and the foundation, to improve through collaboration. And again, this is the group purpose. It was about leveraging the commitment to the higher standards of healthcare, expertise and relevance. And this is best pictured here. And I think this is some really good late artwork by Ian Hyde, I have to just acknowledge. You all know, and I think I said on my first visit here to this particular meeting, you can't be excellent in healthcare without having a real commitment to education and research. It underpins the future and the quality of what we do. And there's no doubt that that's a critical relationship and underpinning of ongoing clinical excellence. But as Ian has wonderfully and colourfully displayed here, there's a lot of noise out there in the world, right? And this is the signal-noise ratio issue. But how do we, in fact, influence and make a difference in our new strategy? And it is a bit about sending a signal and reaching out, leveraging off the quality of our traditional base of clinical excellence, using that expertise and impacting on the broader community to influence the health of the broader community. So this is a collaboration, all of us hanging together in common purpose. And this is where you start to definitely kick in, although as I understand you are engaged in this whole plan. But we then need an operational plan that the executive need to be accountable for, but it has to be underpinned and leveraged off the strength of our core, which is that core clinical services, and looking for new opportunities going forward. Because the only thing to be sure is if all you ever do is all you've ever done, and all you'll ever get is all you've ever got, as some Texan once said. So what have we got here? And again, I think this might be the first time in this setting that, although this is in the strategy plan, isn't it? Is it the strategy plan document, these two objectives? This is new. So this is the distilled out two strategic objectives which have become the lens through which the board and the group executive are filtering work and looking at driving the operational plan. And this is worth spending a moment on. So there are only two strategic objectives, so making it really easy for everybody. And this is the important one to emphasise, because it's probably the newer emphasis, where we will in fact have MARTA products and services designed to engage and empower influencers of health and well-being in the community. This is reaching out in a way that we haven't done before, not that we've been not committed to it, but how do we actually manage to change over time our products and services to meet this new need in new ways off our old platform. And the more traditional, because we can't do this without that very solid platform of tradition, which is to continue to deliver efficient, relevant, high-quality services. We should put excellence in there. It might be overused, but it's certainly a word that's not compromised. By meeting one of the more criteria, clearly we need to continue to focus on that MARTA mission, unmet need, adding value for our consumers and patients. And finally, at the end of the day, we have to survive with improved profitability. And these are the two filters through which this operational planning process that's ongoing will make a difference to your life and will be your deliverable in the next 12 months. So again, in summary, as a summary slide, how using those two lenses, how do we leverage the credibility of this core that we have, this long-standing product of clinical excellence, thinking of more of expertise, not limited to the walls in which you and I live and work, but to continuously improve the quality and relevance of our products and services in 2019-20. There's too many buttons to push in. Investments, I should have just gone back, sorry. Then the next thing is, this is not just going to happen organically. We understand that over time, and this isn't about ditching everything that we've worked for the last 113 years. On the contrary, as I keep repeating, that excellence in platform and clinical care that we're known for and that profile in the community, that credibility is absolutely essential going forward. But to actually leap into the contemporary space, we understand we are going to have to invest. And there's sort of two parts to that. And I think I'm about to introduce Dave to talk a bit more detail about it. But we've already, in fact, very deliberately done, or you have, even before my arrival, started to do some work that's very specific and additional work to start to build against these strategic objectives. Perhaps apart from that first dot point, you will have heard about the journey towards a digital hospital. We are investing and rolling out the LMS system in terms of enterprise learning. MARTA at home, again, the infrastructure and services continue to develop and become increasingly well known, and telehealth services that feed into that new way of doing business going forward. And against the strategic objective 2, again, I think all of these things, much more traditional, almost bricks and mortar stuff, to make sure that that solid platform upon which we will launch our new way of doing business stays very, very well supported. And again, I'm not going to read through them all, but I don't think any of those very specific projects and investments should in fact be new to you. Perhaps the one I might draw attention to, and you'll be seeing a whole lot more of this in the next 12 months, is that corporate services transformation systems. We're only about a decade and a half behind in terms of our IT backbone, and not just our clinical digital platform, but also our corporate systems. We do need to have nothing less than a transformational project, and it won't be cheap. And this is where Dave gets to win you over with what's next.
James Stockdale is a well-known figure in the U.S., and I'll just finish the story, I guess. After being released and being awarded the Medal of Honor, he went on to become an admiral in the U.S. Navy, vice admiral, actually. And after he retired, does the name Ross Perot ring a bell? Yeah. Ross Perot ran for president in 1992, and his running mate was James Stockdale. Yes. They lost. It's too bad. Listen, yeah, that's true. I want to talk to you about medium-term investment planning, and I want to set the stage on this essentially with kind of what is the MTIP and why do we need one. I think, first of all, it might resonate with you that we find ourselves in a current state of being surrounded with old equipment, old systems, old buildings. And I think it's accurate to say that this old infrastructure and assets that we have really have been underinvested in from a maintenance standpoint, and we're playing a little bit of catch-up in that space. So rather than approach that in a reactive way, which I think is a bit of how the organization might have behaved in the past, where, well, what's going to break? Let's fix that. It's actually wiser to be a little more proactive about maintaining those assets in a way that you can ensure they're there and refreshed for the future. So the MTIP has a look at that, but it also takes into account that in order to move the organization forward to be sustainable in the future, we not only have to look at refreshing our assets, but we need to look at how we're going to transform the organization and invest in the strategy of the organization to be relevant in the future. So the process of the MTIP was really to bring all of that together into a single investment plan aligned with the group strategy and supported and aligned with an operating plan that funds it. Okay? So it is a 3 to 5 year plan addressing both those strategic and asset refresh needs. It's aligned with the group strategy. It's intended to give us a focus on priorities because there's honestly a really, really long list of things we not only can do, but we probably should do, and we can't do them all. So we've got to essentially prioritize and focus on the things that are most important to get done. And I think kind of in that same light, as we're looking at those priorities, we recognize that those priorities shift over time. So the MTIP is not a one-and-done plan, right? We don't say, okay, now we've got a plan for the next 3 to 5 years. It's actually something we snapshot now, and probably every calendar year, maybe every 6 months, but certainly as we're coming up to the budget time, we look at that as a rolling plan, and we update that for the current timeline and push out, to another fiscal year at the end. So this, I can't say really well how much work has gone into this and how it's yet still a work in progress from the standpoint of continuous improvement. But there's been an immense amount of effort across the board from members of Group Exec, from individual members down on the Strategic Investment Committee's Refresh Working Group. I'll comment Tim Mullins, Mitch from IT, focusing on the IT infrastructure and the applications, Joe Vassallo and her team on the built environment side, Carmen at Health on the health equipment side. Many, many hours of effort have been kind of put into identifying where we're at and what the priorities will be. On the strategic side, kind of coming out of that new group strategy with the strategic objectives, really giving careful consideration to how are we going to deliver those objectives and what initiatives are needed. And what I'm giving to you today is kind of an overview of where we're at. So in the current year MTIP, from a strategic investment portfolio, we're looking at a total cost of about $122 million over 5 years. And from a refresh and refurbishment standpoint, that asset piece, you'll see that cost of 175, almost 176 million, broken out by technology, infrastructure, education, health equipment, and small value pool. So that's what we view as the demand side of the equation, not the supply side of the equation. And let me say that that was after making really, really hard cuts. So it's not a small task that we're facing in terms of the investment we need to make, not only to keep the organization running in a low-risk mode, but also driving the change that we need to make.
Probably missing a slide here because we should have had a summary slide to just remind people again of the size of those figures. And if you're not sobered by that, we've got another sort of problem, really. The trouble is that money doesn't, we don't actually have a spare bucket for that money, which means as we go forward with this vision piece and the strategy, how we actually also deliver that sustainability. And we don't get to do that without actually producing some margin. If you want to get concrete about that, that's about a $30 million figure next year, right? Which I hate to say it, but that's you and me that get to find that. And I think it's going to have to be bold. People have been working year on year about productivity and trying to cut waste or whatever. the harsh reality is I think it's time for you and your teams and as leaders of the organisation to be a bit bold, because the shift we're asking now to provide that new opportunity is in fact quite significant. At the end of the day, the motivation has to be and return to the mission piece. And again, many of you have been here for a long, long time, and it's not a matter of doubting your commitment, but it's how that commitment lives out in what you do as a leader. So where do we come? We've got a mission that in fact informed our latest strategic vision. I'm not going to read this out. With the strategic foci that we've talked about, strategic objectives which we've articulated pretty clearly, which is our new lens about the way we're going to do business, to inform those strategic investments that really are critical to finding our new space, but will be dependent around our ability to resource that. And we know that there are elements that are going to support that happening, and I'm not going to read them out again, but it is about hanging together well and truly, looking for appropriate external partners, making sure we don't lose sight of the patient and the community, and the financial sustainability. And what's pretty cool about this at the end of the day, it's a pretty closed loop. We get this right, we perpetuate our relevance and value, that of the martyr, and enables us to sustainably deliver on the mission and the values. So that's the plan, and this is all meant to make sense. So, as I said, to me it's a bit like the Stockdale paradox, really, as I ask you, as I and we look together to try and find the investment funding in the way we run our business efficiently. Let's also keep in mind the longer term goals here. So what, as leaders, in terms of the response to the strategy, internal alignment, who else should be working with? And this can by all means make this about your day-to-day operational business as well as investment for the future. External partnerships, who else could we be working with that makes a difference to our relevance, our influence in the community, and hopefully our efficiency as well. Let's not lose sight of the patient, the quality of their experience, and what's more, their hard outcomes as well. And we talked about growth and scale before. There are some very pragmatic issues about working together with people, particularly around back of house stuff, that does in fact make sense. So we can put more money into the front line, but it isn't about growth just for growth's sake. It's about influence and impact. And again, not unreasonable that we continue to hammer that none of this happens without your delivery on budget. Actually, our delivery. Sorry about that. So our delivery on that. So what do? Continue to improve and enhance our core product. That's where our credibility, our profile, and in fact it feeds the expertise, which is in fact the new currency, it seems to me. We've got to be very, very disciplined about measuring our performance in a pretty robust and honest fashion, and owning our part in that. And again, in an iterative fashion, as Dave said, we have a goal there about that medium-term investment plan, but it will in fact be iterative, fed by other major pieces of work such as the master planning process, which I think Dave articulated very, very well. There's great opportunity out there, balanced by enormous challenge. Just glad you're here to carry the load.